My name is Phyllis Klupp. I am 72 and a half and I live in Maryborough, Queensland. I was born in Nowra in the south coast of New South Wales. My parents did a lot of seasonal work, so we travelled up and down New South Wales. My mother is Victorian. So because they did a lot of seasonal work, and then in the end we were living at Tomarong, a little town south of Nowra where Dad worked in a sawmill. And one day we were at school, I think I might have been only about grade 2 or 3, the sawmill burnt down somehow, and Mum and I and the youngest brother went to Sydney because there were not a lot, but Dad's cousins lived there at La Perouse. And at that point in time there were a lot of Maltese people living in tin shacks around the Aboriginal mission and down to Botany Bay, to the bay. And it just happened that the people that were in the one straight opposite where Uncle Werg lived and owned their own house back then had left, so we moved into that tin shack for a while, and there was loans back then for Aboriginal people to buy their own home, so Mum and Dad bought their own home, and that's where I went through school, and where we lived. My mother is Kurnai from Victoria. My grandmother on my father's side is Ewan from the south coast, and my grandfather's Native American Indian. My mother was very strict in a good way, in the way we were brought up. You just had to do what you were told. She never ever told us to do anything that wasn't, bad or anything like that, and I loved her. We had a very good upbringing. Even living in the bush, we did, where Dad cut sleepers for a long time. Dad was really dark, but my mother was sort of a lot fairer. And my Uncle Philip always said that their grandmother was the result of her mother being raped by a white man, and that's where the white came in. And on that side of the family I'm very privileged because there are books that have been written going back, and I've probably got most of them at home now, about that side of the family and things that happened in Victoria around the Gippsland area. My mother's maiden name was Pepper, and my great-grandfather was a full tribal man who back in the 1800s made friends with the white missionaries who were German at that point in time, and he became a Christian, but he would not, on Sundays, this is written in a book, he would not go to the white man's church. He would always go to his people and he would talk to them. We moved to Sydney because the sawmill burnt down when I was in grade 3, and I don't ever remember facing any racism at all. The year that I started high school was the year that co-ed schools came in Sydney, but because my sister was already at a girls' school, Maryborough Junction Home Science School, I had to go there. I've always really been a quite reserved person. I'm not out there. Right through school, I think I only ever remember saying have 1 or 2 friends, and not being in a group or anything like that. I'm still the same. I really think I'm a very privileged. I don't know about my brothers and sisters, but I don't ever remember any racism growing up. There was one incident at Badalla Primary School where a young boy was tormenting me in the playground, and it was a one-teacher school, and the teacher would go over to his house, was just there, and he would have his morning tea, but he'd watch us playing. And this boy that sat behind me was tormenting me the whole time we're out there. And when we came in, he sat behind me, and I put my foot out and I tripped him. And he went flat on his face, and I thought, I'm going to be in big trouble. But the teacher says, that serves you right. He said, I saw you tormenting her outside. When we lived in Sydney, my father was a minister at the little church at Maryborough, and Ben Bird from Cherbourg came down when I would have been about 18 working, and Ben would tell us things about what happened up here at Cherbourg, and he told us about how, because Mergen's just there, that when he walked into Mergen to do any, to go to the shops or something, if he didn't tell the white manager who lived right there, twice he found out that Ben had gone into Cherbourg, so twice he got locked up in jail for not telling him that he wanted to go into the shop. So, it's sort of been there for a long time, the way that Aboriginal people were treated. I think it just stays in your mind. I think that when somebody tells you about something bad that's happening, and it just stays there. When we first moved to Maryborough, which was in 1981, I spoke to an elderly lady at the Baptist church to ask her about early childhood education, and she told me about Unndennoo. But the next thing she told me was I'd find Maryborough to be a very racist town. I had people say to me, yeah, but you're different because you had all these children and things like that when we did emergency fostering. Then I say to people, but no, a friend of mine from Cherbourg who has lived here when I first moved here, she takes in children, anybody, but she doesn't get anything. She just helps them and supports them if they have to move on. Underlying it still is quite racist. When we first came here, I was at the Bank of New South Wales, and the lady in front of me was Hannah Williams, and she told me about Unndennoo Kindergarten and suggested that I go out and just talk to the people out there, the teachers and that. So I did one day, and this is about maybe 6 months after we moved here, and because I was working in a childcare place in Melbourne, and I'm a kid person, I got involved with them, and I've been involved with them ever since 81. I was a teacher for about 9 years when it wasn't mandatory to have your qualifications, because I wasn't a qualified teacher, but I did that for about 9 or 10 years, and when it came in, I didn't have to leave, but I thought it would be good if I did, and not long after that I got the position as a homeschool liaison with Central State School, covering the 6 state schools here. That involved my getting to know the families, the principals, the teachers, and if there were any issues at all, then I would talk to the parents, because a lot of the families here, some of the families here in Maryborough are from Murrabinda, Cherbourg, and I don't know if you know that Aboriginal people can be very shy, and when there was maybe some issues at school, the children wouldn't speak up. So when I'd talk to them, it'd be they tell me what happened, and it'd be completely different to what the principal had, and they were either suspended or given, time out and stuff like that. So, yeah, that was my work until I retired. I met my husband when I was working as a telephonist in the Sydney Post Office in Martin Place, when one of my friends who I work with got engaged, and we were all invited, and we went to the engagement party, and he was there because she engaged a soldier that was in Unndennoo in 1st Battalion. And then about 6 months later, when they got married, we were all invited, and he asked me if he could take me home. And that wasn't very good, because in that point in time, the trams were going out to La Perouse, and they sort of stopped running at a certain time. So he had to walk back into Matraville somewhere to be able to get back to Holsworthy Barracks. Yeah. He was a very old-fashioned man. He still is, to a point where we dated for quite a while, and then he asked me to marry him, and he came out and he spoke to my father and asked if he could have his daughter in marriage, and not long after that we were married, and we moved into a flat in Sydney, but just wouldn't have been 6 months, I don't think, when 1 battalion went to Vietnam. So I moved back home with Mum and Dad for the 12 months he was away. And when he came back, they were forming 8 in Brisbane, and he was posted to 8 battalions, so we came up there, and we were only there for about 6 months. That's where I met my oldest army friend, who we are still friends. And then 8 Battalion, I think the English were pulling out of Terendak Army Camp in Malaysia, which was about 20 minutes drive from Malacca, and we were over there, and it was like a town on its own, Terendak Army Camp. We had our own supermarket and flats, and it was right beside the sea and everything there. And that's where our eldest son was born. The reason why I came to Maryborough was my husband did 20 years in the army, and we were in Melbourne, and his mum was the most beautiful lady, and she had cancer, and he's only got one sister. So I talked him into coming back to Maryborough, because my parents were good and my sisters were there and brothers with them. So we did. We moved back here 31 years ago and stayed, and I think he's glad now that we're not in the rat race. Maryborough Aboriginal housing was really started when Nana Ivy Tabane, and she was rearing her grandchildren at the time, came down here, and they were actually living in shacks down, what do you call it, down there past near the Granville Bridge. And her daughter, who was my sister and really adopted me here, her and her sister-in-law, at one of the shows, there was something in the newspaper, and I tried to see if I could find that, of them standing in the old showgrounds, talking about, saying how they were homeless and things like that. And that's when it first started, because of the homelessness of those families that were here from like Woorabinda. Well, they were homeless because there was no housing commission, and nobody would rent them a house at that point in time. I've said for many, many years, this is the best Aboriginal community that I've ever been involved with. They're very accepting. Like I said, Nana Ivy Tabane was wonderful. Auntie Olga Miller was a really, I got on really well with her. In her last days, I would go and I'd take her shopping or something like that. I've just found it to be a really, really good community. But unfortunately, at this point in time, most of them have gone.